Why did the dog stop barking the moment she stepped into the yard? Not slowly, not hesitantly. They stopped like someone had turned off a storm. 47 military working dogs, trained for explosives, for attack, for battlefield pursuit, froze in perfect silence as a woman with a mop crossed the white chalk line of the restricted training zone. It was 6:30 hours. The sun was barely above the hangars. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. She was small, maybe 5'4". Blue maintenance shirt, faded, sleeves rolled once unevenly. A bucket in one hand, a mop in the other. She didn't look up. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cashin did. What the hell is she doing in my training grid? No one answered. Because everyone else was watching the dogs. Titan, the largest Malinois on base, lowered his massive head. Knox, a shepherd with a confirmed combat bite record, shifted sideways. Not away from her, toward her. They moved together. A slow arc. A silent wall of fur and muscle. Between Cashin and the woman. She still hadn't said a word. Cashin stepped forward. "Ma'am, you are in a restricted zone. You need to leave immediately." No response. He reached out. Every dog leaned. Not snarling, not lunging. Guarding. The air changed. Not louder, heavier. Like something invisible had stepped into the yard. "What did you do to them?" Cashin snapped. She finally raised her eyes. Green. Calm. Not afraid. Just measuring. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly. Her voice didn't carry. But the dogs leaned closer to her. Someone whispered, "Why are they shielding her?" No one had an answer. They searched her. No treats. No devices. No scent tools. Just calloused hands, old scars on her wrists. A body that moved like it remembered discipline, even when it pretended not to. They told her to leave. She nodded once. And the dogs followed. Not trained follow. Not recall. Joyce. Every single one. The handlers stood frozen. Because working dogs do not choose. They obey. Unless they recognize. And suddenly, without warning, a siren screamed across the yard. Dog down, obstacle collapse. The woman dropped the mop. It hit the dirt with a soft, hollow sound. She was already running. Her boots moved like they remembered terrain that didn't exist here. Her hands were already opening her pockets, checking for things she wasn't supposed to have. She knelt beside Rex, the shepherd pinned beneath twisted steel. Blood soaked the sand. His breathing was shallow. Her voice changed. Not louder. Not sharper. Just certain. "I need compression, IV kit, hemostatic gauze now." And everyone obeyed. Without realizing they were obeying her. Her hands moved with ruthless calm. Checking gums. Checking pulse. Finding veins by feel. She took a radio. She didn't ask. She switched channels. Encrypted channels. Channels no civilian should know. Tango 7 Mike, K9 casualty, hemorrhagic shock suspected, coordinates transmitting. Someone in comms whispered, That's JSOC frequency." Cashin grabbed her shoulder. "You are not authorized." Her shirt tore. And the world stopped. Her back was a map. Tattoos layered over scars. Paw prints. Coordinates. A modified trident. Not decoration. History. Someone gasped. Someone else saluted without thinking. "Master Chief." She didn't turn. Her hand stayed on the dog. "He needs surgery in 30 minutes, she said. "Preferably sooner." That was the moment. The moment the yard stopped seeing a janitor and started realizing they had been walking past something sacred. But Fern Archer wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at the dog. Because dogs remember loyalty long after people forget. And she had never forgotten. Not one of them. Not ever. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She didn't wait for permission. Fern Archer rose from the dirt with blood still on her hands and stepped back just enough to let the veterinary team slide Rex onto the stretcher. Her eyes followed the gurney as it disappeared into the clinic doors, not like someone watching an animal, but like someone watching a partner being taken into surgery. Only after the doors shut did she finally look around. And when she did, the entire yard felt smaller. Dozens of soldiers, officers, handlers. Every single one of them frozen, unsure whether to speak, salute, apologize, or simply get out of her way. The dogs were still there. 47 bodies forming a loose ring around her, not aggressive, not guarding, just present, as if the ground itself had decided she belonged here. Cashin stood 10 feet away, his face drained of command and color. "You," his voice cracked, he cleared his throat. "Who are you?" Fern looked at him, not unkindly, not warmly. Just honestly. "My name is Fern." "That's not what I meant." She tilted her head slightly. "It's the only name I use." Behind her, Titan sat. Not because he was told to. Because he chose to. That unsettled everyone more than the tattoos ever could. Colonel Forrester arrived less than a minute later, but it felt like the entire base held its breath while he walked across the yard. He didn't speak at first. He simply studied her. Her stance. Her breathing. Her hands, the way they hovered close to her torso as if ready to work or defend without conscious thought. "Your former," he said finally. She didn't deny it. He exhaled slowly. "You're not maintenance." "I am today." That answer irritated Cashin. "You manipulated my dogs." "No," Fern said. "They recognized me." "That's not how training works. That's not how loyalty works either." The words landed softly. And somehow harder. The handlers whispered behind them. Did she really place that IV that fast? She used trauma protocol. Where would a janitor learn that? No one noticed the youngest handler, Daisy, standing at the back with her hand over her mouth. Because Daisy saw something no one else had noticed. The way Fern avoided looking at the dogs for too long. Like she didn't trust herself to. Forrester cleared his throat. "You're going to come with me." Fern nodded once, no resistance, no fear. But as she turned to walk, the dogs shifted with her. Not following. Accompanying. They moved like an honor corridor forming itself in real time. Someone whispered, "They're escorting her." Inside the admin building, Fern sat in a small office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. She didn't slouch. Didn't fidget. Didn't look around. Just waited. Forrester studied her file on the screen. Then froze. Then leaned closer. Then stood up. "Master Chief Petty Officer Fern Archer," he said quietly. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group, K-9 Operations." The room went silent. She didn't react. "You were presumed medically retired." "I was." "You're not authorized to be here." "I wasn't here to be authorized," she said gently. "I was here to disappear." That was the first crack in her armor. Just a hairline fracture. Forrester lowered himself back into his chair. "Why?" She stared at a blank patch of wall. "Because if I stayed visible," she said, "someone would eventually ask me to teach again. And if I taught again, I'd have to care again. And if I cared again." Her voice didn't break. It simply lowered. "Then I'd lose more." Silence pressed against the walls. Forrester didn't push. "Those dogs out there," he said quietly, "they didn't just react to you. They responded like they've known you their entire lives." She nodded once. "Some of them have." "Here?" "No, they're bloodlines." She finally met his eyes. "I trained their parents, their grandparents, some of their great-grandparents. Those dogs know my hands. They know my posture. They know the way I breathe when something is wrong." Forrester exhaled. "So they remembered you." "No," Fern corrected softly. "They remembered the work." A knock came at the door. Daisy stood there, nervous. "Sir, Rex is stable. Surgery went well." Fern closed her eyes. Just for a second. Not relief. Gratitude. Daisy hesitated. He kept trying to lift his head, like he was looking for someone. Fern swallowed. "That's normal," she said. "He just wanted to make sure his pack was still there." Daisy lingered. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Fern nodded. "How do you do it?" Daisy asked. "Work with them knowing they could be hurt, or worse." Fern's answer came slowly. "You don't get strong enough to not feel it," she said. "You get brave enough to carry it." Daisy nodded, tears in her eyes. After she left, Forrester leaned forward. "There's been an inquiry call from JSOC," he said. "Someone knows you're here." Fern's shoulders tightened. "I didn't want to be found yet." "But you were." She stood. "I need to go back to work." Forrester blinked. "Work? The floors aren't going to clean themselves." He stared at her. "You could command this entire base." Fern gave a tired smile. "I don't need command, I need quiet." She stepped out of the office. And the dogs rose again. But this time, not in defense. In recognition. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something painful stirred. Because she had come here to forget. But the past had recognized her. And it was waiting. Sometimes the hardest battle isn't survival. It's remembering who you were. When you're afraid to be her again. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. Fern lay on a narrow cot in the small maintenance locker room, staring at the cracked ceiling tiles, listening to the bass settle into its night rhythm. Distant boots, a door closing, the low hum of generators, the quiet breathing of the dogs outside the building, 47 steady heartbeats rising and falling in a pattern that felt almost like a lullaby. They hadn't left. Not when she went inside. Not when the lights went out. Not when the moon climbed over the hangars. They stayed. She turned onto her side, eyes open, jaw tight. She had come here to be invisible. To mop floors. To empty trash cans. To be just another forgotten name on a payroll list. She had not come here to be remembered. Her phone vibrated once on the small metal table beside her cot. She didn't touch it. She already knew what it meant. Encrypted numbers never called for nothing. She sat up slowly, rubbed her face, then finally reached for the phone. Unknown caller. She stared at it for 3 long seconds. Then she answered. "Archer." The voice on the other end was distorted, flattened by encryption layers. Cold, efficient. "Ghost 7, we need to confirm your status." "I'm retired." "So you've said." Her eyes closed. "We have a problem," the voice continued, "and you're the only variable that still fits." She didn't answer. "We lost contact with a humanitarian convoy in northern Ethiopia. 6 hostages. 3 are children. Local militants are broadcasting proof-of-life footage. Execution window 48 hours. Fern's hand tightened around the phone. "That's not my mission anymore. Your dog's bloodline is on the ground." Her breath caught. "The Cairo line," the voice said. "You trained them. They won't accept a new handler in that terrain." Silence stretched. She whispered, "Send me the feed." Her phone buzzed again, video loaded. A shaky image. 3 children. Tied hands. Fear in their eyes. A militant voice speaking deadlines. Fern looked away. "You're not cleared," the voice said. "You're not obligated, but if no one goes in with those dogs, they go in blind." Fern swallowed hard. "I'll call you back." She hung up. Her hands were shaking. Outside, a soft whine rose low, questioning. Cairo Jr. was awake. He knew. She stood, slipped on her boots, and opened the door. The dogs were sitting. Every one of them. Watching her. Cairo Jr. stepped forward and pressed his head gently against her thigh. Her hand rested on his skull automatically. "You're not supposed to remember me," she whispered. He breathed out softly. She knelt, resting her forehead against his. "I'm tired," she murmured. "I'm so tired." He didn't move. He didn't leave. She stood again, eyes wet but steady now. Because somewhere across the world, children were counting hours. And she knew what it felt like to wait for help that might never come. She went back inside. By dawn, Forrester was standing outside the maintenance building. "You're leaving," he said. Fern nodded. "They called." "Yes." "Are you coming back?" She hesitated. "I don't know." He didn't try to stop her. "You saved one of our dogs yesterday," he said quietly. "That matters. So will what happens next." She slung a small duffel over her shoulder. Cairo Jr. rose and took position at her side without being told. The other dogs stood too. They didn't whine. They didn't bark. They simply watched her walk away. As if they understood that sometimes the pack sends one of its own into the dark, not because they want to lose her, but because they trust her to bring the light back. Sometimes redemption doesn't feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like walking back into the fire. Because you can't live with yourself if you don't. She boarded the aircraft without ceremony. No cameras. No announcements. No medals pinned to her chest. Just a gray transport plane under a dark sky and the low, steady presence of Cairo Jr. at her side. The cabin smelled of oil and canvas and recycled air. Red lights glowed faintly over the seats. 2 operators sat across from her, faces hidden under helmets and night vision mounts. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They knew who she was. They just weren't sure if she was ready to be her again. Fern sat with her hands folded between her knees, staring at the floor plates. The engines roared into motion. The vibration climbed through the metal into her bones, a familiar tremor that made old scars ache and old memories stir. Her jaw tightened. She hated how quickly her body remembered. The plane lifted, and something inside her followed. Hours later, heat replaced cold. Africa. Dust in the air. Dry wind. The smell of burned brush and diesel fuel. They landed on a forgotten strip that barely counted as a runway. Distant hills cut jagged silhouettes against a fatting sun. Intel officers waited in a small prefab shack. Satellite images spread across a folding table. A compound. 2 perimeter towers. Razor wire. 6 hostages. 3 children. "They move at dawn," the officer said. "They've already recorded execution footage." Fern studied the photos without blinking. "Where are the dogs?" "Inside the village. They won't deploy without you." She exhaled slowly. They brought her to them. 2 Malinois and a shepherd Cairo's line, nervous, restless, not refusing commands but not trusting them either. The moment Fern stepped forward, everything changed. Ears lifted. Postures softened. One dog whined softly and leaned toward her hand. She knelt. "Easy," she murmured. The dogs pressed closer. Not trained. Relieved. The handler whispered, "They haven't done that for anyone else." Fern rested her forehead briefly against Cairo Jr. "We move tonight," she said. "No speeches. No bravado. Just truth." They approached the compound under moonless sky. Fern moved like she had never stopped being what she was: slow, quiet, deliberate. Cairo Jr. ghosted beside her, reading her breath, her pulse, her intent. She froze, raised a fist. The dogs froze too. A silhouette shifted in a tower window. Fern exhaled. 2 fingers. Downward motion. The dogs slid into shadow. No sound. They breached. Not violently. Precisely. A guard turned and froze when Cairo's teeth found fabric, not flesh. Controlled. Silent. Fern slipped past him, heart steady, hands shaking just enough to remind her she was human. Inside a small room. 6 shapes. Fear. Dust. Tears. 3 children looked up. A little girl whispered, "Are you real?" Fern knelt slowly so she didn't scare her. "Yes," she said softly, "and you're coming home." The girl reached out and touched Fern's sleeve. Her fingers were trembling. Fern felt something in her chest break, quietly, like a bone finally healing in the wrong place. The extraction took 12 minutes. No gunfire. No shouting. Just breath, movement, trust. When they were airborne again, Fern sat on the floor of the cabin, back against the wall, one hand resting on Cairo Jr.'s neck. A child leaned against her shoulder. "Are you a soldier?" the boy asked. Fern hesitated. "I'm someone who didn't want to be anymore," she said, "but still is." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. The plane turned west, and Fern stared into the dark, knowing something else had turned with it. Because she had gone back into the fire. And fire always leaves a mark. The first night back she didn't dream. That was what unsettled her most. Not the silence. Not the jet lag. Not the fact that she woke up before dawn with her hands already clenched, already ready. It was the absence. No faces. No echoes. No memory loops dragging her through old corridors of smoke and sand. Just nothing. Like her mind had stepped into a quiet room and closed the door behind itself. Fern sat on the edge of the cot in the base's temporary quarters, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor until the hum of fluorescent lights began to feel like company. Cairo Jr. lay near the door. He was awake. He always was. She stood, slipped on her boots, and stepped outside. The base was quieter than she remembered, not empty, just careful, like everyone was trying not to disturb something invisible that had moved in overnight. She walked past the kennels. 47 sets of eyes followed her. No barking. No movement. Just watching. And waiting. Cashin stood near the far fence line, hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her approach. "They told me you went back in," he said finally. Fern nodded. "And you brought them all out?" "Yes." He exhaled. "No one else could have done it." "That's not true." He shook his head. "No one else would have." The words lingered. She looked away. "That's not a compliment," she said quietly. "No," Cashin replied. "It's a responsibility." She swallowed. He hesitated. "You don't have to stay here." "I know. But you are." "Yes." "Why?" Fern rested her hand on the fence wire, feeling the cold metal through her palm. "Because running doesn't make the weight lighter," she said. "It just makes it lonelier." Cashin nodded once. Later that afternoon, Daisy approached her near the kennels. Rex, bandaged but alert, was lying in the sun. Daisy smiled when Fern knelt beside him. "He won't eat unless you're nearby," she said softly. Fern smiled faintly. "He's dramatic." Daisy hesitated. "They're starting a new handler training rotation." Fern's hand stilled. "They want you to oversee it." "I'm not a trainer anymore." "They don't care," Daisy said. "The dogs already chose you." Fern looked up at the kennels, at the quiet, breathing line of living loyalty. She felt something press gently against her chest. Not fear. Not pride. Purpose. That night, she sat alone in the empty briefing room. A projector hummed quietly. Maps glowed faintly on the wall. She stared at them like they were mirrors, not of places, but of versions of herself she had tried to bury. She whispered, "I didn't come back to belong." And yet something in the room whispered back, "You already do." She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come as forgiveness. Sometimes it comes as being trusted again. Before you trust yourself. She stood at the edge of the training yard before sunrise, the sky still bruised purple and gray, the air cool enough to sting her lungs. The dogs were already awake. They always were. They lined the fence in quiet rows, tails still, eyes fixed on her as if the day itself would not begin until she did. Fern rested her hands on the chain link, breathing slowly. For a long time, she said nothing. She didn't need to. The dogs leaned forward, listening anyway. Somewhere behind her, Boots approached, Daisy, Cashin, a few young handlers who had only heard her name spoken in low voices. None of them spoke. They had learned instinctively that Fern Archer did not fill silence. She let it work. She stepped through the gate. The dogs didn't surge. They didn't bark. They simply opened a path. Fern walked down the center like someone moving through a living memory. She stopped beside Rex, still wearing his bandage like a badge. She knelt and pressed her forehead lightly against his. "You did good," she whispered. He thumped his tail once. Not loud. Just enough. She rose and finally turned to the humans. "I don't train dogs," she said quietly. "I train trust. If you want that, you'll have to earn it from them and from yourselves." No applause. No speeches. Just nods. And the work began. Days passed, then weeks. Handlers learned to breathe slower, to touch gentler, to listen longer. Fern walked the yard every morning, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. When she corrected someone, it was never loud, but it was never wrong. And slowly, impossibly, the dogs began responding to their new partners the way they once had to her. Not replacing her. Honoring her. Late one evening, Fern sat alone on the low concrete wall near the kennels, watching the sun sink into orange dust. Cairo Jr. rested his head on her knee. "You know," she murmured, "I thought if I came back the ghosts would be louder." He breathed slowly. "They're not," she whispered, "they're quieter." She leaned forward, elbows on her thighs. "Maybe they just wanted to know I didn't leave for nothing." A soft breeze moved through the yard. Flags rustled. Somewhere a dog barked once, not alarmed, not afraid. Just alive. Cashin approached and stood beside her. "They're calling your program the Archer Line," he said. Fern huffed softly. "That's unnecessary." "Maybe," he replied, "but it means something to the people who sleep better because of it." She looked out at the yard again. At the quiet breathing rows. At the handlers who now walked with calmer steps. At the dogs who trusted without condition. "I didn't come back to be remembered," she said. "I came back because something was still waiting for me." "And you found it." "No," she replied softly, "it found me." Cairo Jr. shifted closer. Fern rested her hand on his head, eyes reflecting the last light of the day. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes redemption isn't loud or bright. Sometimes it's a quiet woman in a faded blue shirt, walking the long way back to herself.